Welcome to the HR on the Offensive podcast, brought to you by Lace Partners. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to the latest HR on the Offensive podcast. As always, it is your humble narrator, Chris Howard from Lace Partners. Delighted that you could once again join us. And today's podcast is going to be a little bit on leadership and a little bit on AI. And we're going to talk a book which we came across at Lace Partners, which has been written by a fabulous author who we've decided to get on the podcast and have a chat with today. As always, I like to do this as a round table type discussion. And so I've got a couple of marvellous lacers joining me. I'll start to my left as I'm looking, which is the fabulous Charlie Frost. Charlie, how you doing, mate? You all right?
Good, thanks, Chris.
I thought for a split second you were going to leave yourself on mute, but nope, he's come off, so that's good. And also joining us is co-founder and managing director, Cathy Acrotopulo. How are you, Cathy?
I am good, Chris. Thank you very much. Looking forward to today. Really great topic and a wonderful guest.
Yes, a really great topic and something that everyone seems to be talking about more and more and more, AI, but nobody seems to have answers. So as we like to do at least, we like to have discussions and canvass different opinions. And to do that, we have got a guest today. His name is Nick Chatrath. He is a leadership coach and MD of the Artesian Group. Nick, how are you doing, sir?
Very well, thanks. Delighted to be here.
Yeah, delighted to have you on. So, Nick, you will not be aware of this, but we have a little tradition that we like to have on the HR on the Offensive podcast, and that is to kick off with a fundamentally different question. We are going to talk about your book, Threshold Leadership, Leading the Age of AI, but we are going to do our fundamentally different questions first. I'm going to give you a few seconds to think about it, seeing as you're the guest, and I'm going to pick on Charlie first. So, Charlie, I read an article a week ago, 2 weeks ago, which was about a rare piece of Lego that was found lost at sea. It was found by a 13-year-old boy, a piece of Lego from 1997. It was of an octopus. So my question to you is, if you could find one thing that could be or own that was incredibly rare, that was supposedly lost, what would you ask for?
So I think if it was something lost or something older, to find, I think a nice one from my perspective, being a Chelsea fan, would be a kind of old Chelsea retro shirt. I think something from 2004, 2005 would be a good era. I think that would be my choice.
Nice. And do you know what? You completely thrown me under the bus there, because my choice was also a football shirt, an Arsenal shirt. Arsenal had a charity campaign, which they've run over the last few years, called No More Red, where the shirts they have are all white. And you can only get them if you do some charity work, so they don't actually mass produce them. So that's the rare thing that I'd want. Cathy, are you going to be creative?
Mine is not a football shirt, just to be really clear. Which will not be any surprise to anyone who knows me. I'm going to go completely monetary and go for not lost, but rare. I think one of the rarest diamonds are red diamonds. I'm going to go for the largest red diamond that's out there. I would love to find that and have that within my possession. So completely monetary, that's fine, but much more fun than a football shirt, in my opinion.
In your opinion. So if anybody has any red diamonds that you want to gift aid to Cathy, I'm sure she would happily accept them. Nick, just to wrap us up before we start talking about your book, what would you go for?
I'd go for a Chelsea football shirt. No, I'm only joking. I would not. What I would go for doesn't exist anymore, and it would have to be fresh, as you will understand when I say what it is. I love food, and I've got a half Greek, half Indian heritage, so I would love to eat a meal freshly prepared of the kind they made in the remote villages, maybe in the mid-20th century India, or Greece, a couple of centuries BC. I love the diets of those nations, but just to eat what they were eating centuries ago or decades ago would be fun.
That's absolutely smashed our three materialistic pieces out of the water. So I think we'll move swiftly on, and I'll stay with you then, Nick. If you could give our wonderful listeners a little bit of background. You've given us a little bit of background, heritage background, but if you could talk a little bit about yourself, what you do, and also we'll talk about the book, but tell us a little bit about maybe a 1 minute about the book and why you decided to write it. But we'll kick off with just a little bit about yourself and the work that you do.
Yes, well, about myself, I'm married, I have 3 daughters and live in the UK. I've done most of my life. I've travelled a lot and have lived abroad for several months at a time in different nations. I love languages, love doing triathlon at a very amateur level. And I founded a couple of tech startups. One of them was AI related. And I've spent a lot of my career doing leadership consulting, leadership coaching. And my biggest purpose professionally is to help leaders flourish and to help organizations thrive. So that's the broader background for my writing work and my professional work generally.
Okay, interesting. So the book, talk to us a little about the book, Threshold Leadership, Leading in the Age of AI. I guess the best place to start is to ask, why did you decide to write it?
Spoken about AI following the tech startup years, spoken in a variety of places. We've spoken with politicians, spoken with people in tea shops abroad, boardrooms, and people in different walks of life. I realize everyone's got a different prediction about what AI's growth is going to mean to them. And you have some people who are very much on the optimistic side, some people who are less optimistic, and some people who think basically a doom scenario coming. And I call these different groups the bloomers, the gloomers, and the doomers. And whatever you think about where AI is going to go, I think we are at a key shaping moment in our human history. And so because of that, and because of, in my view, the critical importance of organizations and of leadership in organizations, critical importance to our society, to our planet, our universe, because of that, and then with technology accelerating, especially AI, we're at such a key moment. And there is a lot of fear around as well. So the bloomers, okay, they may think, yes, fine, we've had previous disruptions. We had, just look at the Industrial Revolution. Yes, it was a disruption, but we tweaked the systems that we had, and ultimately we unlocked unprecedented human flourishing. So you've got people who say that, but on the other hand, other people, more gloomers, will say, well, hang on, look at the robots who are going to take all of our jobs. Look at journalism, where news articles are now being written by AI and human journalists are getting edged out and proprietors are saving lots of money. Or you've got the doomers, if you watch a film like Terminator or you watch the Black Mirror series or whatever. And it's not hard to imagine scenarios where a highly competent AI that's unleashed unwisely could cause something extremely negative. So there is a lot of fear out there. And I felt it was important to connect AI and leadership and write into this space.
Nice. So let's delve into some of the questions or the issues that the book raises. And one of them looks at the role of leaders. Obviously, this is a HR podcast designed for HR professionals. And so I wanted to just kind of explore with you, and then I'll get the views of Cathy and then Charlie on this, the impact of AI in terms of helping leaders to prepare for the transformation that is being predicted within businesses and society, wider society, as we start to move and evolve into this world of it having a more increasing impact on the world of work that we have.
Yes, there's a lot to speak about really in relation to HR and the coming transformation. I mean, a couple of categories right off the bat, and then curious to hear what questions you have around that. One is about the new leadership operating model that I think will be needed. And that covers mindset, stage of development, and some quite focused capability areas. And then I think there's another area that's useful for HR leaders, which is how to advocate for the budget they need. Because some of this depends on the ambition of business leaders and can depend on the skills of HR leaders in shaping a strategic conversation with those leaders. So where would you like to focus next in the conversation?
Well, Cathy, do you want to just give us some initial thoughts in terms of how you think that AI is going to impact and transform the way in which leaders are thinking about how, I guess, from a HR perspective?
Certainly from the book point of view, Nick, I'd be quite keen to explore the requirement of leaders to maybe hone their critical thinking capability in the space of transformation and AI-enabled transformation. So being able to think through different scenarios, being able to understand the best route of action and come to effective decisions, right? It's sort of how does leadership capabilities and in particular critical thinking need to shift in the context of rapid change enabled by AI? It'd be great to sort of explore that because I know that's the theme that sort of comes through in the book.
Yes, it does. I think number one is to help leaders be ready to think critically at their best. Number two is enhancing critical thinking skills as we've always known them. And so structured thinking, problem solving, top-down communication. And then number three is adding in some critical thinking elements that are going to be particularly important in the world of AI. And I think that's where I'd like to just sort of focus in on my answer, really, which is that senior leaders now are increasingly being asked to make decisions based on input data that's coming from models from different departments, different functions, and these models are increasingly AI fueled. You may have a senior leader looking to make decisions around strategic transformation where there's some input from a marketing model, input from a finance type model, input from a model trying to map certain strategic options. So very different kinds of functional models. And the quality of the data and the way the data it should be interpreted will vary from one to one. Now, sometimes what's happening in a lot of organizations is they're asking the question, how certain are you? How certain is the model that answer A, if we take this into a binary question, answer A is better than answer B? What's the percentage certainty coming out of the model? And it's a reasonable question to ask. And an answer a leader may get is, oh, yes, it's 55% certain that you should go to A, not B. Now, in the absence of a sophisticated approach to thinking about this, the leader may knee-jerk and say, well, 55%, that's not very good. That's not a great confidence interval. So essentially downplay the relevance of what's coming out of this model. Whereas, in fact, that can be one of the worst things to do, because this leader may be thinking back to some statistics class from back when they were an undergrad, some hazy recollection that, hang on, don't you need a 95% confidence interval or 90% to be really confident and making a good decision? But they're making a category error. And if a leader, if every single decision they make is 55% likely to be the right one and 45% likely to be the wrong one, they'll end up doing extremely well once you ramp up those probabilities. So it's about understanding the scientific method, understanding the nature of data, different kind of outputs that come from different kind of models. So that's the aspect of critical thinking that I think needs to be supercharged as part of the mix, added to the classic stuff that we've been helping leaders with for years or decades.
And I guess just to expand on that a bit, Nick, there is an element here of the AI will provide insights and help you interpret data and make recommendations, I guess. But what's your sort of guidance, I guess, from a leadership point of view of the things that will remain human around that in terms of, ultimately the insights, the guidance, the data, as you say, needs to be critically evaluated to understand how reliable and how meaningful that information is and how I, as a leader, need to evaluate that to make a better decision. But ultimately, the judgment aspect of this, in terms of bringing in the critical thinking and the human aspect of that, in my context, how relevant is this information? Knowing the people that will be impacted, how relevant is the information? There are contextual and humanistic aspects to this, which maybe need to be dialed up from a leadership point of view to be able to manage effectively in that space. What's your view on that?
Oh, I think it's absolutely critical, Cathy. And two examples of that would be, number one, embodied intelligence. This is a reason why humans need to be at the core. The fact that we are made of flesh and machines are not, this fact matters more than many people think. So much of our deep wisdom arises from the fact that we are embodied and we have lived our lives. We've grown. We were once children. We've grown. We've made mistakes, and we carry those. There's a residue of past upsets, or even significant upsets, that we carry in our bodies that can give us an early warning system about what's right or wrong to do next. So, and we're just understanding more about this in terms of latest research. So learning more about that and trusting that embodied wisdom is a key aspect of the new leadership operating system. And from breathing to rhythms of recovery and rest to tapping into your bodily reactions when you are triggered, these are all elements of enhancing embodied intelligence. And the other one you said about putting the humans at the center and about judgment, I think that's absolutely right. And another way of putting that is to put purpose at the center. And it's humans who put purpose into the machine. An AI can have an objective function. There are ones that can be more sophisticated that can set their own objective functions, but only within a set of parameters. And some of the media reporting about this is misleading, because where there's a very narrow example, for example, there was this AI that beat humans on a pretty complicated car racing game. And the AI had to make judgments in order to win this, because it wasn't one of these old-fashioned car racing games that I used to play in the 1980s when I was a teenager, where you got very limited dimensions. It's sort of left, right, accelerate, brake, and that was it. This one, the AI was having to make judgments about how the humans would respond under certain situations, the humans it was racing against, and it ended up winning. So it was able to set certain objectives, but within a limited scope. Ultimately, it was humans who designed that whole game and set the parameters for that AI. So helping leaders tap into their deepest purpose and to do that well is a critical thing.
Building on that, Nick, I think that's one of the bits that resonated with me in the book, is that keeping purpose at the center of everything with leaders looking forwards. And I think linking it to one of the topics that we've spoken about before is that human in the loop element. So even when you have this assisted element of technology and AI, it's considering the human in the loop that interacts with that system. How do you design that interaction to still keep that human purpose of why you're doing it at the center of everything, and not just using AI and systems for the sake of it? I think that's really important. I think that piece of the book, along with that nurturing independent thought and independent thinking, is really, really crucial going forward, that you allow, even when leaders are being overloaded with these insights, they're taking the time to slow down and still think independently and not be overloaded with the data and outputs they're being given by these systems.
Absolutely. And the book, by the way, is called The Threshold, Leading in the Age of AI. And it wasn't something you just said, Charlie, but just picking up from earlier. And about purpose, we've been working with one of the biggest semiconductor companies in the world, and they were expanding really quickly and realizing their leadership capabilities just weren't keeping up. And this is a company that's at the heart of AI advancement right now. And they asked our help, and we've designed and delivered various leadership development programs for them. We're taking over 1,000 leaders per year through their programs. And at the heart of two of these programs is something that helps leaders connect with their purpose. It helps them cultivate stillness. It's walking meditation called Labyrinth. It's a product that we have tailored. It's millennia old. And what it does powerfully for these leaders is it helps them connect who they are, what their purpose is, connect all of that with what they're going to do. So that phrase, humans in the loop, is a nice one. So having something that is kinesthetically engaging, that links to embodied intelligence, that helps leaders cultivate stillness at the right times of the day and the week and the month, then that's going to be an element that leaders will need going forward.
And can we explore that a bit, Nick? Because from our listeners' point of view, just to understand, when you say cultivate stillness, just to sort of get under the skin of that a little bit, because I think it'd be quite intriguing to understand the sort of what that really means in practice, because I know your book gives lots of practical guidance as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, a couple of practical examples. I remember once I was on a retreat in a place called Mottisfont in the south of England, and maybe some of your listeners have been there. And this is an abbey that was originally founded in just the very start of the 13th century. And I was there, and there's a well there. There's a font, Mottisfont. So we were standing around this well reflecting, and the leader of this retreat pointed to the well and said, "Look at the water there." And we looked at it, and the water was completely still. And then he said, look over to the right-hand side there. What do you see? And there was a gushing stream, really powerful gushing stream. And the retreat leader said, well, in fact, this well channels 900 liters of water per minute into that gushing stream. And when I heard him say it, initially, I didn't believe what he said, because I was standing there right next to this well that looked completely still on the surface. But then I looked at the well again, and then I looked to the right at the stream, and there was no doubting it. I could see the water was powerful, and the only source of this powerful water was this serene spring that has always flowed. And what I took away from that is that productivity and flow and stillness meet. And so there can be very simple practices like taking a few deep breaths. Or once I was serving a call center client where we had hundreds of people whose daily work is working on call centers. And we were trying to land for them the importance and the benefit of cultivating stillness in the working day. And they said, come on, look, we work 8 hours. We finish a call and then another call comes in. We just work like that. Call. Started to empathize more for call center operatives with whom I engage sometimes. So they're like, we can't take a break. But then one of their colleagues said, well, we are allowed to go to the toilet or we're allowed to go to the water cooler. And then this was interesting because we started talking around that. Said, what do you do when you walk to the water cooler then? Because you are actually allowed to not take the next call for a few minutes here and there, and they get a lunch break. But what do you do during that time? So they came up with this ritual where as they walked to the water cooler, they were intentionally not checking their phone, trying to slow their breathing, maybe just stand near the water cooler, just sort of close their eyes for 20 seconds, breathe. So breathing is a big part of it, not loading up with more and more cognition. I check your emails or have another rich conversation with a colleague when you've got 5 minutes break, rather put some music on. So it's about recovery and performance. This cultivating stillness is all about saying it's a myth. If I'm going to be at work for 10 hours in a day, it is a myth for me to think that I'm going to be my most effective self if I just try and work all those 10 hours. If I create some blocks of recovery and only have 9 hours of work left, I'll achieve way more in those 9 hours. That idea, but much more needed as the pace of change accelerates.
Absolutely. And I guess this is where, Nick, it gets particularly interesting for our listeners who are coming from an HR perspective into this, is what is HR's role, I guess, to learn from some of these practical guidance and insights from your book and apply that in a way that could help individuals from a productivity and effectiveness point of view and a well-being perspective as well. And whether that's something that, there's been a bigger focus than ever, I think, on well-being from an HR's perspective of what they can do for the workforce. But how much of this do you feel is so critical for leadership performance and leadership through transformation that actually it's something that HR may well need to consider in terms of what their offering is in this space for leaders and their development?
I think so. HR can't ignore it, in my opinion. And the reason why is this is very much a bottom line conversation we're having here. It's about creating value. And Charlie mentioned earlier in our conversation around independent thinking and generating a culture which prizes the independent thinking of each individual. That is extremely value adding. And through this kind of approach, one company rescued a $200 million product in 45 minutes. And in another context, a hospital moved in 9 months from 1 star to 4 stars. And the problem that can occur very easily and exacerbated by AI is that leaders' thinking becomes derivative or superficial. And at one level, we're back to critical thinking. A key element of critical thinking is creating an environment where, if, for example, Cathy, you and I are in a one-on-one, if I can create an environment where you can do your finest independent thinking, then you're going to thrive more, our company's going to thrive more. And so often we degenerate into a superficial thinking where we interrupt each other, we're not really paying attention to each other, or where I start to think what I think my boss wants me to think for me to get that bonus or that promotion next year. So then when AI comes into the mix and you look at tools like ChatGPT and other competitors, quote, doing our thinking for us, many people are using those tools and cutting and pasting. I cannot tell you the amount of times, including from very senior leaders in the last few months, I have seen output that I look at that and I think, I know your writing style, I know your speaking style, and that is ChatGPT, what I'm getting there. It's like the way the paragraphs are chat. So if you do the cut and paste, you're kind of outsourcing your thinking, and that's going to hurt the bottom line, and HR should be interested in that. But if you use some of these tools as an input to creativity, but then apply your independent thinking, then you can connect, you can actually answer the strategic challenges of the day with your best intelligence, rather than parroting some generic piece of writing that may sound good at some superficial level.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting that, actually, because obviously I've tried and utilized ChatGPT, but it's quite interesting that even my team now, so when we've seen internally where other people from other departments have used ChatGPT, my team, because we use it so much, but we use it as the starting point to then craft your own sort of personalization around it. I've got members in my team that are like, I know that person's written that by ChatGPT. So it's that kind of, we are already adapting. And I wanted to talk a little bit about this because when we were chatting about doing this podcast beforehand, you were talking about adaptive change and adaptive challenges. Can you just, for the benefit of our listeners, just talk us through from a book context and just from your own perspective, like what do we mean when we're talking about that, and what's the impact that it can have on HR from an AI perspective as well?
So my book is structured in 4 pathways, and we've already mentioned the first 3 of them, and you've asked about the 4th one. So we've spoken about cultivating stillness, embodying intelligence, and thinking independently. The final pathway is called maturing consciousness. And this is about the stage of mental development that adults can have. This is about increasing our complexity of mind as we become more mature in order to engage better with increasingly complex challenges in our world. And so adaptive leadership refers exactly to that. The idea is that complex problems need adaptive leadership. And in using that term, I'm making a distinction between technical leadership and adaptive leadership. This term, adaptive leadership, by the way, is not my term. The bedrock of research underlining this, people like Ron Heifetz and others have given these examples, like many surgeries, although I'm not a surgeon, but to me it seems very complicated, and it is very complicated. Essentially, many surgeries are not adaptive challenges, they're technical challenges. And if you have enough training and experience, you can do that. And the knowledge is there. Whereas changing a culture is an adaptive challenge, or influencing populations beneficially in the context of the COVID pandemic. There's an adaptive challenge. So these are complex problems where there are unknown unknowns, where there is causality, but it's only really obvious in hindsight. So I'm making a distinction between the complicated and the complex. So there's adaptive leadership is very important for HR to look at, because the growing insinuation of AI into our societies is an adaptive challenge. If anyone wants to try and convince me it's a technical challenge, then I will just ask them, well, show me the plan. So it's an adaptive challenge. And so leaders need to become increasingly able to lead in adaptive ways so they can make progress on that kind of challenge that doesn't have a clear solution. And crucially, for leaders who are adaptive, this is not about solving problems for others. This is about mobilizing others to solve their own problems. And that's a shift that when you get, well, even from individual contributor up to initial management at middle management, and then even more senior, it's increasingly stages of embracing that more and more, that it's not you solving the problem anymore, but increasingly your role is to mobilize and inspire others to solve their problems, crucially where these problems are adaptive.
Yeah, I think that's a fascinating thing that it almost feels like we can delve into a podcast in its own on, but we're running out of time, so I didn't want to cut Charlie out of the final sort of bits. Charlie, from your perspective, obviously we've talked through the 4 different pathways that Nick's mentioned, and we've explored a little bit of the different theory behind it, but was there any bits from the book or any elements that you want to take out, given that you're our AI expert at HR? And for those people listening in, they're going, oh, is he the AI expert? Right, I'll start reaching out to him then. But any final sort of thoughts before we wrap up today?
Yeah, and I just wanted to build on actually something that Nick was just talking about adaptive challenges, and linking that back to leadership in the age of AI. I think that point about leaders needing to shift this focus to directing people, to enabling them and empowering them to be able to make their own decisions, and enabling them more in this age of AI, I think is a really important piece that we need to be linking back to our listeners. What do HR practitioners and people functions need to be thinking about? We've spoken quite a lot about it. For leaders to be in that position to be able to enable their reportees in the age of AI to be empowered and to use these tools correctly. One of the prerequisites that HR functions need to be thinking about now is the training and learning to upskill their organizations and the leaders to lead in this age. Leaders are only going to be able to empower their reportees and be able to navigate this new AI transformation if they fully understand what this technology means. They have the tools, they have the capability. Organizations need to be thinking about how to upskill their leadership teams and their managers to be able to have the right skills. And only then will they be able to really flourish and manage the adaptive change environment. So I think that's a really important piece to call out to the listeners. And we've spoken about it on the live stream a few weeks ago, Chris, is to start to think long term about where you are today and the skills and capabilities you need to build up, rather than just simply bringing in external capabilities. How can you build up that internal capability to prepare your organization for this change?
Yeah, I think it's a really good footnote to end on today. Again, I feel like we could have really delved into these topics a little bit more, but Nick will say, well, just buy my book instead. And you can certainly listen into or read into some of them as well. But Nick, thank you very, very much, as always, for joining us.
A pleasure. Thanks for having me on today.
Thank you for being with us. And Cathy, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, absolutely. Great conversation. Thank you very much, Nick.
And Charlie, last but not least, thank you very much for being with us on this AI exploration that we are currently undertaking at Lysander's HR Professionals.
Thanks, Chris. And thanks, Nick, for joining.
Yes, if you would like to find out more about the book, what we'll do is we'll put a link in the show notes and you can reach out to Nick. Where can they find you? Are you on socials, or where's the best place to find you?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. There's also the Artesian website, artesiangroup.co.uk.
Okay, so if you want to have a chat with Nick about his book or about some of the things that we've discussed today, you can certainly do that as well. Thank you very much from the four of us, and hopefully we're going to catch you next time on the HR on the Offensive podcast. Bye-bye.